In January 1962, executives from Cleveland ordered workers inside Canada's greatest tractor factory to take sledgehammers to their own prototypes. Cockshutt's future, destroyed on the shop floor. Then its secret rotary combine design was quietly sold to a rival, a machine so revolutionary it would triple Massey Ferguson's market share. This was a company that once employed 6,000 workers, invented the world's first live independent PTO, and helped arm the Allies across 2 world wars. So how did Canada's tractor empire end up gutted from within? That story begins on a ship called the Lady Digby in 1827. The Cockshutt story begins on the rolling waves of the Atlantic with a wooden bark called the Lady Digby. In July 1827, James Cockshutt gathered his family, his wife Mary, their children, and a handful of battered trunks, and left behind a landscape of shuttered mills and shrinking prospects in Yorkshire. Ignatius, the eldest son, was just 15. Their journey from Liverpool to Quebec stretched for weeks, the ship battered by storms and crowded with other hopeful emigrants. By early September, they reached the mouth of the St. Lawrence, carrying little more than a modest inheritance and the will to start over. The Cockshutts had planned for Pittsburgh, but a chance encounter on the voyage changed everything. James Laycock, another passenger, convinced James Cockshutt that York, what would become Toronto, held better promise. Within a year, James opened a general store east of the Market Square, then built a double-fronted shop and home on King Street. Laycock soon returned to England, leaving the Cockshutts to carve out their future in a raw colonial town. Ignatius learned the business standing behind the counter, not in a classroom. He was 17 when his father sent him to manage a new branch in Brantford, a rough-edged village on the Grand River. The first attempt failed, but Ignatius stayed, drawn by the opportunity in this growing settlement. He worked alongside his brother, then his sister, building up the family's trade in goods and supplies. Over the decades, Ignatius turned those early profits into something far larger. He bought up rental properties, farms, and mortgages around Brantford and nearby Mount Pleasant, often lending to newcomers from Lancashire. By the 1870s, he controlled a web of land and assets that made him one of the area's most substantial men. His fortune, built on risk, resilience, and relentless work, would become the seed money for a new kind of ambition. The Cockshutts were no longer just shopkeepers. They were poised to shape the future of Canadian manufacturing, their story rooted in the grit of immigration and the hard lessons of the land. James George Cockshutt was only 27 when he set out to do what no one in his family had dared: build something from iron, not just trade in it. In 1877, with capital drawn from Ignatius's careful lending and property deals, he opened the doors to the Brantford Plough Works. The first shop was modest, a single-story brick building, 5 men at workbenches, and a handful of plows and scufflers lined up for inspection. Yet even at this scale, James was after more than local trade. He believed Canadian farmers deserved tools built for their land, not cast-offs from American factories across the border. The timing was no accident. 2 years later, Ottawa's National Policy Tariff Act slammed a wall of duties on foreign-made implements, up to 45% in some categories. For small Canadian manufacturers, it was a lifeline. For Cockshutt, it was jet fuel. No longer forced to compete with the flood of cheaper American plows, James and his team could expand, experiment, and sell to a swelling market hungry for homegrown equipment. Orders rolled in from the wheat boom prairies, carried by the new rail lines slicing west. With each season, the shop grew, adding new forges, a foundry, and more workers, dozens, then hundreds, as the years passed. By 1903, what began as a 5-man operation had sprawled into a 33-acre industrial complex on Mohawk Street. The new site was more than just a factory. It was a self-contained city of industry, with rows of brick buildings, a timekeeper's office, and a workforce that would soon number in the hundreds. The Cockshutt plant became known as the most complete plow factory in North America, its red brick facades rising over Brantford's neighborhoods. Here, the company could design, cast, assemble, and ship everything from walking plows to the latest mechanical implements, feeding not just the farms of Ontario, but the new settlements pushing into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. James George's vision, backed by family resources and protected by tariff policy, turned Brantford into a manufacturing powerhouse. The Cockshutt name was stamped onto steel and wood that traveled across a continent, building both fortunes and a city's reputation for industrial might. By the spring of 1942, the gates at Cockshutt's Mohawk Street complex never closed. The war had swept away any notion of business as usual. Inside those sprawling brick walls, nearly 6,000 men and women moved in shifts that blurred the line between day and night. The city's heartbeat matched the factory whistle. 3 8-hour shifts, every hour of every day, all for the Allied cause. The pressure was relentless. Orders arrived from Ottawa and Washington. Lancaster bomber landing gear, B-29 Super Fortress components, exhaust rings for the sleek Mosquito fighters. Cockshutt's engineers redrew blueprints at midnight, adapting stamping lines meant for plows to punch out aircraft parts with precision. The company built a new hall at 148 Mohawk Street in 1943, a cavernous structure with massive wooden beams, erected quickly to sidestep wartime steel shortages. Its floor filled with presses, jigs, and racks of landing gear assemblies, destined for airfields half a world away. The workforce swelled beyond anything Brantford had seen. Teenagers, grandfathers, and hundreds of women joined the ranks, many trading aprons for coveralls. The plant's timekeeper's office processed a tidal wave of punch cards. Cafeterias ran non-stop. Buses idled outside at dawn and dusk, shuttling exhausted crews home as the next wave poured in. Every hand counted, assembling, riveting, inspecting, packing crates bound for Halifax and Montreal. This was more than production. It was a test of resolve and ingenuity. Cockshutt's people learned to improvise, to solve problems on the fly, to push machinery and bodies to the edge. In those years, the factory became a proving ground for ideas and endurance, forging a culture that would soon deliver engineering breakthroughs far beyond plows and parts. The war left its mark on every worker and every brick, setting the stage for the company's boldest leap yet. In the autumn of 1946, a quiet revolution took shape on the factory floor in Brantford. At its center stood Ivor McRae, a Cockshutt engineer whose name would soon be known well beyond Canada's borders. For decades, tractors forced farmers to choose, either keep their implements running or bring the whole machine to a halt. Power takeoff shafts, PTOS, were nothing new, but every system on the market tied the PTO's fate to the tractor's main clutch. Stop to shift gears or avoid a stone, and the combine behind you shuddered to a standstill, crops jamming in the auger, harvest interrupted. The frustration was universal, but no one had solved it. McRae's answer was both simple in theory and radical in execution. A shaft within a shaft, driven directly from the engine flywheel, with its own clutch and control lever. This live independent PTO allowed implements to run at full speed, no matter what the tractor itself was doing. For the first time, a farmer could slow, stop, or maneuver without choking a baler or stalling a thresher. The change was immediate and profound. No more wasted hours clearing jams, no more risk to man or machine from sudden stops. The Model 30, rolled out in October 1946, became the world's first production tractor to offer this technology as standard equipment. Industry eyes turned to Nebraska in May 1947, where the university's tractor test lab put the Model 30 through its paces. The verdict was clear. Cockshutt's live PTO worked not just in theory, but in the field. Word spread quickly. Within a handful of years, American giants scrambled to replicate the design, but the lead belonged to Brantford. McRae's breakthrough didn't just give Cockshutt a technical edge, it set a new global standard. For a moment, Canadian engineering stood at the pinnacle of modern agriculture, reshaping how the world harvested its food. In the late 1950s, the boardroom at Cockshutt began to feel colder. For decades, the company had been run by men who shared the family name, who walked the factory floor with the same sense of belonging as the workers themselves. But by 1958, something was shifting. Shares, once tightly held, began to trade hands in quiet, calculated moves. The buyers were faceless, their intentions masked behind shell companies and distant addresses. The family's hold slipped, not with a bang, but with the slow, relentless accumulation of stock. Bill Cockshutt, the last of the line to wield real authority, watched as the registry filled with unfamiliar names. A single quote from those tense days lingered. "It's not the company we built if we don't control it." The words hung in the air as the percentage ticked upward, 20%, then 25%, edging toward the magic number. By the time the family realized the scale of the infiltration, nearly a third of the company's shares had moved beyond their grasp. Reports surfaced of a British mercantile bank, English Transcontinental, acting as a front for interests that refused to show their faces. The mechanics were simple but devastating. Buy small lots, never enough to attract headlines, but always enough to matter. The boardroom's old alliances began to fracture. Bill Cockshutt tried to rally support, but each week brought new rumors, new doubts. The sense of siege grew. At meetings, the questions grew sharper, the silences longer. It was no longer clear who could be trusted. For the first time since 1877, the company's destiny was being written not by the men who built it, but by strangers who saw only numbers on a ledger. The shadows lengthened across Mohawk Street, and the stage was set for a CUP that would end a family's century-old command. January 1962 arrived with an order that could not be reversed. The factory floor, once alive with the clang of presses and the steady rhythm of assembly lines, fell silent. The new owners from Cleveland, White Motor Company, did not come to build, but to halt. Production lines that had shaped the Model 30 and powered a continent's harvest ground to a stop. In the main hall, 3 hand-built Model 580 prototypes stood as the last hope for Cockshutt's future. These were not just tractors, they were the company's answer to the next era, a 100-horsepower leap meant to reclaim lost ground. But the decision had already been made. 2 of the prototypes were destroyed on the spot. A sledgehammer swung by a white executive shattered more than steel. It broke any illusion that Brantford's legacy would continue. Workers watched, powerless, as years of engineering vanished in an instant. The third and only completed Model 580 was left abandoned, a relic of ambition with nowhere to go. The silence that followed was heavy. For generations, the Cockshutt name had stood for innovation and pride. Now, those who had given their lives to the line filed out past shuttered gates, their future uncertain. The machines that once fed nations were gone, and with them, the identity of an entire city began to unravel. In 1966, the last embers of Cockshutt's ingenuity flickered in secret, deep within the Brantford plant. A team of engineers had spent years perfecting a radical new concept, the rotary combine. Unlike anything on the market, this design promised to transform the harvest, faster, cleaner, more efficient. But the company's fate was no longer in its own hands. The boardroom, now directed from Cleveland, saw little value in the future. The rotary combine project was quietly sold off, stripped of its Brantford identity, and delivered to Massey. No patents bore a Cockshutt name. No press releases celebrated the breakthrough. The men who built it watched their work vanish behind a wall of non-disclosure agreements. Within a few short years, Massey's rotary combine hit the fields, its engineering roots buried. Massey's share of the global combine market jumped from 7% to 22% almost overnight, a surge built on the back of Brantford's lost invention. For the engineers who had poured their skill into the project, there was no recognition, only the knowledge that their creation now wore another company's badge. The rotary combine, born of Cockshutt's tradition of practical genius, became another asset, liquidated, another line item in the ledger of erasure. In the story of Canadian manufacturing, this was the final theft, not just of jobs or machines, but of the very ideas that once set Brantford apart. What had begun as a family's quest to build for the land ended with their best work sold off in silence, the last traces of innovation swept away with the closing of the gates. Today, Brantford's empty lots and the lone factory shell mark more than lost jobs. They mark the erasure of Canadian innovation once exported to the world. As foreign control and short-term profit continue to reshape industries, Cockshutt's story warns what's truly at stake. Not just livelihoods, but identity, ambition, and the land itself. The scars of that loss are still visible if we choose to look.